Hades version 1.0 released on September 17th, 2020 to widespread critical acclaim and quickly became one of the most beloved games of the past few years. Its time in early access allowed it to officially release in a state of extremely high polish, with a heap of content and tight, responsive gameplay that went along with a well-told, wonderfully acted, and beautifully represented story that still had plotlines to unravel after 100 hours, earning it a 97.4% rating on Steam as of late April when I'm recording this, which is good for 3rd place all time. Clearly, Hades is pretty good, and everyone agrees. Within a few months of playing this game, it entered my personal top 3 favorite games of all time list. But while it hits basically everything it's trying to out of the park, I think there's one element in Hades that's the most outstanding and unique out of the bunch, because I think it's not only amazing, but it's also innovative. And I think that if other games start adopting the system to a degree, which they absolutely should, it could lead to a huge improvement to a component of video games that feels like it hasn't improved in decades. In this video, I want to go through some of the top contenders for the title of best part of Hades and why I think they're all amazing, but ultimately why I decided on what I did to be the true crowning achievement of one of the most perfectly crafted experiences in modern games. And real quick, I just want to say that there are spoilers here for up until your first escape, and we're also going to be discussing some of the later game weapon aspects. Also, I don't have the equipment to capture Switch gameplay, so I might be using other people's footage here and there, but I'll credit them at the top right when I do. But anyways, let's get into what we're really here for. One of the things I need to commend Hades for is the way it handles its weapons, because it really hits the perfect balance between making sure every weapon is very unique and making sure that each of these unique weapons can still be specced out to match your playstyle. Hades currently, since I don't know what the plans are for potential future DLC, has 6 weapons, and each of them play entirely different from one another, with each having a different balance of speed, range, specials, and movesets. When I was early on in the game and I unlocked the bow, I got a bit confused because I assumed the bow was a secondary weapon, allowing me to get off ranged attacks while I still got up close and personal with my sword, and I was really weirded out that this game expected me to want to play through runs with just a bow. For such a high action game, it felt weird to only have a bow and arrow. But as it turns out, the bow is one of my favorite weapons to use, and it was actually responsible for my first victory over Hades, since I could attack him at a range and better avoid attacks whose tells I was less familiar with at the time. And because of the hammer upgrades and aspect I had during that run, I was able to make each shot much more powerful and focus my volley of arrows directly at him, which absolutely murked the poor man when coupled with my boons. The bow played entirely, and I mean entirely different from the sword, and that's the case with all the weapons. The only ones that you could say have a somewhat similar playstyle are the spear and the shield, but because of the difference in their melee ranges, the precision of the spear's ranged attack and its recall damage, and the shield bash among other things, even in their most basic state, they're definitely distinct from one another. The uniqueness of weapons makes it feel like you're playing 6 different games in one, and it really allows you to feel like you can really play the game you want to play. Or if you have an affinity for all of the weapons and playstyles, it lets you feel like the game is always staying fresh and different. There's a reason why the weapons in Doom are so much more fun and important than the weapons in Uncharted, or why the ones in Bloodborne are more impactful than the ones in Dark Souls. Because instead of having some standouts among a sea of slightly different versions of a very basic idea, everything feels like it has a unique purpose. But to add to the flexibility and sheer amount of options you have, there's also the aspects and hammer upgrades for each weapon, which allow you to mold each of these unique weapons into one of dozens of configurations, some of which you have full control over, those being the aspects, which change everything from your basic movement to the entirety of your weapon's moveset, and some of which you only have some control over, being the Daedalus hammer upgrades that can once again change up core parts of your run, like how one allows you to restore 2% of your health every time you kill someone with your special attack. Basically, the weapon system of Hades is a series of dials that fine-tune your experience and keep every run feeling different almost entirely on their own. But that fine-tuning and run variation is increased even further still with the next thing that deserves a whole bunch of credit in this game: the boon system. You might be thinking, hey, so what's so special about the boon system in Hades? Tons of roguelikes have systems where your character is given abilities that can shape a certain run. And you're right, but again, I think Hades balances all the moving parts of that system way better than other games tend to do. Let's look at 2 other roguelikes, Risk of Rain 2 and Dead Cells. In one of these, the things that you get are entirely randomized and you deal with what you're given. You're able to have a tiny amount of choice when it comes to the 3D printers, which essentially allow you to give up certain abilities in order to get a specific one. But even then, there's randomness involved in terms of which ability you're actually giving up to get this one. You also occasionally have the option between 3 items that you can clearly see in front of you, but also the abilities in Risk of Rain 2, at least 99% of the ones you'll find in these little pod things, won't make a huge impact on their own. They're way more useful when you stack a bunch of them together. In Dead Cells, you're able to choose between a few different mutations at specific intervals, but you can see all of the options in front of you and you can always easily go with the same type of build every single time. You also have scrolls scattered around the levels to upgrade your skills, but there's only 3 skills to upgrade and you usually get 2 to 3 options with every scroll, so again, you can keep almost everything constant from run to run. The major variability in that game comes from the weapons you find. Hades decides to go for a really well thought out middle ground between these two extremes. There's some overarching randomness involved. For example, what god's boons are going to be available to you in the next room, and what 3 boons are they offering. But also there's choice involved. You're able to choose between multiple doors which may have different gods behind them, and you can pick any of the 3 boons you're being offered. And even past that, you can tip the odds more in your favor. In the later game, you unlock the ability to either change the rewards for the next room a limited amount of times, or change the boons that are being offered to you a limited amount of times. Both of these things are still randomized even when you do make that choice, but you can potentially give yourself the exact thing that you were looking for. You can also use keepsakes to make sure you receive a specific god's boons first, and you can change who that god is at the beginning of every single biome, but that also means that you aren't able to reap the benefits of any of the other keepsakes for that section. You're able to almost guarantee that you get certain options to match your build if you need something specific, but there's always a trade-off, and even when the scales are tipped, random chance is still a factor. The boons also affect your run more than each individual item or skill on its own in the other 2 games. And depending on things like your weapon, upgrades, and previous boons, your decisions on what to get can actually change drastically. For example, I always get the title dash when I'm using my sword if I can, because the dash does crazy damage, especially with the double dash mirror ability, and since I need to be up close anyways to use my sword, it's constantly helping me do passive damage because I always dash towards the enemies. But if I'm using a bow, I try to wait to see if I can get the divine dash. A less aggressive option, but way more practical considering staying away from enemies is the play with the bow most of the time. This system makes you think more than other roguelikes while also transforming Zagreus the most with each decision. It's a wickedly intelligent system, and I can't get over how great it is. The last of the runner-ups, if you will, is the game's story, and more specifically, how it combines story with its roguelike gameplay. The world of Hades is rich and full of stories, and I think the best part of its storytelling is how infused it is to the setting and circumstances of why you're going through the gameplay loop you are. Bringing the idea of immortality into the mix of a roguelike idea seems so obvious, and deciding to make it so that that immortal is trying to escape someplace seems like the next logical step. Making that place the underworld? Duh, because then it makes sense why you go back to the start when you die. You're trying to make it out of the underworld. Okay, so let's just throw in a couple of Greek stories and bing bang boom. That wasn't so hard, was it? Except no, it seems so obvious right now, looking at it in front of our eyes. It seems like this exact setting and story and these exact characters were what this genre was literally meant for. Even though it wasn't. The roguelike genre started back in 1980 with the game Rogue. The fact that everything here makes so much sense and feels like it should have been the first ever story to match with this gameplay is a testament to how amazingly written and storyboarded everything is. Everything makes sense in the context of Zagreus' never-ending cycle of escape and death. His relationship with Hades, the characters he interacts with, the side stories of those characters unable to meet or live happily despite being so close to one another, the main character being the only one who has the ability to interact with all of these disjointed personalities. The story is unable to be separated from the rest of the game because they're baked into one another. And in fact, that's the exact reason why I think everything I've mentioned isn't the best part of Hades. The thing about this game is basically every part of it is intertwined with a whole bunch of other parts in order to create its amazing systems. I didn't even realize just how much that was true until I started writing this video, but you can't talk about the gameplay without talking about the weapons. You can't talk about those without mentioning the aspects of the hammer and the boons. You can't mention those without talking about each other and also the keepsakes and mirror upgrades. You can't mention those without mentioning nectar and character relationships. You can't talk about those without talking about the story, and you can't talk about the story without mentioning how it connects back to the gameplay. Everything is connected, and originally that interconnectivity was going to be the ultimate resolution to this video. What's the best thing about Hades? It's interconnectedness. Except, that sounds stupid. Like, what am I, a yoga instructor? No, I'm a... But as I was looking through everything Hades had to offer, I started thinking about something interesting. An element of Hades that's still connected to its overall tapestry of ideas but could still be extracted from this game and applied in some ways to others down the line. Something that could stand on its own and something that optimized the game's endgame and difficulty better than any other system I've seen. And with difficulty being such an important part of games that's barely seen any interesting advancements since console games started, I think if games began to look closely at the system, that could all start to change. I'm talking, of course, about Hell Mode. Nah, I'm kidding. I'm talking about the Pact of Punishment. Wait, you're gonna talk about all of these other things not being the best part of Hades, but you're gonna say a glorified menu screen is? You're damn right I am. The Pact of Punishment is my favorite difficulty system ever, and I need to talk about it. Difficulty gets brought up somewhat often in gaming. A lot of the time it's because somebody's raining down an indictment of From Software's or other tough games' decisions to not have an easy mode. But even in general, with games that have multiple difficulties, it's something that's always been pretty mediocrely done, and we just sort of all roll with it. Easy, medium, hard, super duper hard, whatever the game ends up calling these difficulties, so often it results in an arbitrary uptick of enemy attack power, accuracy, rate of fire, a whole bunch of other stuff. Easy mode, bullet minuses 5 health. Hardcore mode, bullet minuses 500 health. Donkey has 2 full videos talking about difficulty in games and how stupid it is a lot of the time. It's very rare that you see a game where the difficulty instead causes enemies to, say, flank you, or maybe they start faking attacks to try and trick you, or any other type of more complicated behavior. And it makes sense why that is. That's a lot of work to put into something that could be easily handled by just changing a couple of numbers in the code. But that doesn't mean that the current system is good. Bringing in more specific user adjustable options is a step in the right direction. As divisive as The Last of Us 2 was, it was also almost universally heralded for its accessibility options last year. And some of those allowed you to skip puzzles or have a really long listening mode, which was reserved for easier difficulties in the previous game, but this time around gave you the option to have that on for harder difficulties. It allowed you to make certain things easier for yourself if you needed it. And that's great, and way more than most games do, but the Pact of Punishment is hands down the coolest way to do this in my opinion, and I truly think that it can be adjusted slightly in interesting ways to be used in other games. This pact essentially lets you select your own custom challenge while also pushing you to try and increase that challenge with every completed run. You start off with this heat gauge that isn't filled, and a list of options to choose from in terms of how to increase your challenge. These options could be just adding on to enemy health, giving enemies 1 layer of invincibility, adding a new big change to a boss fight, adding another enemy into the mix during mini bosses, giving you a time limit to complete each biome, a whole bunch of stuff. And by accepting any of these conditions, your meter fills up by a certain amount, which is displayed over here. If you choose a condition worth 1 heat, it'll add 1 heat to your meter, same with 2 and 3. And a lot of these can stack more than once, so enemies can have even more health, or you'll have even less time. To get rewarded for your runs, you need to 1-up your heat every time after victory. For example, if I have a heat of 1 and I finish the run and get all of the rewards, the next time I run through I need to up the heat to 2 in order to get the rewards this time around. So I need to readjust my conditions. The system is a perfect way to know what you're getting into, what's going to be affected, and to plan out what you need to make sure to avoid or obtain in your run to make it easier on yourself. It lets the endgame of Hades feel like it's constantly ramping up at a perfect speed considering your skills, because you're the one who's setting that speed, with a little nudging from the game to make sure that you aren't coasting. Compare that to Dead Cells, and I love that game and everything about it, but it's got a pretty simple difficulty system. Basically, once you beat it, you can try it on 1 boss cell, which is slightly harder. Beating that means you can go to 2 boss cells, which is slightly harder, etc., until 5. There's no variability, it's rigid and the same for everyone. And that's not bad, it's actually perfectly normal, but it also results in some potentially poor balancing and frustration from the players, which is evident considering they're still updating the difficulty curve between each boss cell 3 years after the game's initial release. The thing is, with a lot of games, this system can't be copied verbatim. It wouldn't make a lot of sense. But I think that it would be really cool for other roguelikes to adopt, as well as using a slightly different version of this for some other games. There's a rumor that Doom Eternal is getting an arcade mode somewhere down the line, and I don't know if that's happening or not, but hypothetically, wouldn't it be super cool if instead of having a set increasing difficulty or being able to choose from the normal Doom difficulties, you could instead start it with a series of conditions like a tyrant multiplier that meant every tyrant would be matched with another tyrant, so there's usually 2 of them at a certain point, but all of a sudden now there are 4, or maybe you need to choose a weapon mod to lose every 10 waves. You could do a lot of really creative stuff that still ultimately will most likely end up as an array of sliders, but the specificity of those sliders and the amount of them and the creativity behind them make the whole experience more engaging. Some games wouldn't be compatible with this idea, but you can always take it down to the basics. Instead of a pact-like system, follow more closely to The Last of Us' system. It allowed you to individually set the amount of damage you took, your ally aggressiveness, and how many resources you'd find. There were preset difficulties, but you could change the specifics to whatever you like. The Pact of Punishment is a perfect fit for Hades gameplay, and it's, to me at least, the biggest reason why the number of hours I've played this game are where they are right now. Without this, I'd have spent like a third of the time that I have in this game. And instead, here I am, always looking forward to another run because it gets more intense every time. It's also a system that other games need to look at as inspiration to try and find the perfect middle ground between not spending forever on making every difficulty setting distinct and not phoning it in and changing 2 values for every setting. I look forward to seeing if and how games start to implement this unique new take on difficulty, and I hope its impact is noticeable for years to come. Now, if I could only get my hands on the goddamn vinyl! Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you did and you're new, leave a sub. That'd be really appreciated. And you can check out my channel for more reviews, analysis, and discussions around all kinds of games, and obviously more coming in the future. Let me know if you have a different take on what the best part of Hades is. I'd be really curious to see what other people think, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.